the Victorian Labor Government of Jacinta Allan is looking to strengthen so-called hate speech laws. The Australian Christian lobby is warning this will result in Christians being dragged before tribunals, not because they are hateful of anyone, but because the laws empower activists to make vexatious complaints. Now, Liberal Upper House MP Renee Heath is speaking out against the changes, and she joins me now. Renee, thanks very much for your time. Why are these changes to the vilification laws so dangerous?
Thank you so much for having me. Firstly, the disturbing thing about laws like this is that they are underpinned by Labor's obsession with policing conversations and opinions. And this is not the type of law that you would expect to find in a free and democratic state. I agree that it should be unlawful to threaten somebody and to discriminate, and it already is. The problem is that these laws is that legitimate disagreement or a difference of point of view or opinion on certain topics can be ruled as hate speech. This is a serious encroachment of free speech and the ability to debate and to hear different views. So I probably, like anyone else, I don't want to see anyone vilified or targeted, especially from, we've seen a huge rise in anti-Semitism and hatred towards the Jewish community since October 7. But I also don't want to see innocent people treated like criminals just for having an opinion that an activist doesn't like.
No, I couldn't agree more, Renee. You're absolutely right. We have to get the balance right. You've already got a Racial and Religious Tolerance Act in Victoria, which came in during the early 2000s, and there was that famous case of two pastors, the two Dannies, who were dragged before VCAT for preaching about Islam from the Quran at a seminar. And they eventually won that case. But the irony of that is that you've had people in the streets of Melbourne shouting "from the river to the sea," which is a genocidal slogan, and all sorts of anti-Semitism, as you just said, and yet no one has been charged under the Racial and Religious Tolerance Act, and now they're looking to beef up an act even further when they're not even using existing powers.
That's exactly right. And I think that the worrying thing about this legislation is, like most things that this Labor government is doing, is that they are trying to ram it through with minimal public consultation. So the consultation period for these amendments closed last Friday, and most ordinary Victorians don't even know what's going on or what is at stake. So the coalition is pushing for the government to extend the consultation period to give people more of a chance to have their say. And beyond that, we have to be extremely vigilant when assessing any legislation like this that encroaches on a free and democratic society.
Yep. I noticed, Renee, that the parliamentary inquiry which looked into this handed down its recommendations probably a couple of years ago. This has been sitting on the shelf for a while. So it predates this upsurge in anti-Semitism, which is the reason they're using for the law. But the really dangerous clauses in this proposed new law have to do with inserting these nebulous concepts of sexual identity and gender identity as if anyone is seen to be inciting hatred, contempt, revulsion or ridicule of people with those attributes, they could be hauled before a tribunal. Now, this is difficult for someone who perhaps believes that, girls should have safe spaces, women and girls should have private safe spaces or should be entitled to their sport. That could be deemed as inciting hatred towards so-called transgender people, could it not?
Look, it absolutely could. And I think that there seems to be this trend at the moment where if somebody hates what somebody is saying, they can turn around and accuse them of hate speech when sometimes they're just speaking factually. So at the moment, this has been confined to race and religion. But under the proposed changes, the government wants to expand this to 10 protective attributes, and that will include gender, gender identity, sex characteristics, and sexual orientation. And this is really dangerous territory because these are issues that infringe on other people's rights. And if it becomes unlawful to talk about it, even respectfully, then we've completely lost free speech in these areas. Not only is it regressive, it's inherently oppressive. Similar laws have been in place, and I know you use the examples of the two pastors, but similar laws are already in place in Queensland and Tassie. And as a result, we have seen a breastfeeding specialist prosecuted for saying that men can't breastfeed, and another woman punished for simply wanting to create an app for women.
Yeah.
Now, these women have done nothing wrong. The biological facts of breastfeeding and the importance of women's only spaces shouldn't be controversial, and they should be something that is protected. And above all, having these arguments should not be classified as hate speech and vilification.
Yep.
But the problem with these laws is they risk creating an inverted justice system, and we are protecting and punishing the wrong people.
Absolutely. Look, I can attest to this personally. I've been sued in the state of Queensland, where I lived for a few years, for supposedly vilifying two drag queens because I said they were dangerous role models to children because they promoted gender fluid ideology and sexualised LGBTIQA+ concepts. So these laws are very dangerous. I've been through a 4-year legal ordeal, which is not over. And here in Victoria, they're looking at now introducing similar sort of laws and also using this concept of harm. I'm just wondering where that might leave, say, Christian schools, Muslim schools, and even churches and mosques. If they are speaking about, traditional values of marriage and gender, could activists potentially come and say that that sort of preaching or teaching in a school is harmful?
Look, I think you're right in your assessment there. Apparently, this will include wearing a T-shirt in public that displays a hateful message about religion. This comes back to the question of definition, which is everything in the law. What is considered a hateful message? We have seen the words "Jew die" graffitied around Melbourne, and I would consider that hateful. But we have also seen T-shirts with various messages that criticise different religions. Now, personally, I think that's distasteful and disrespectful, but I certainly don't want to see things like that outlawed. And what is going to be considered unlawful under these changes, again, it's too subjective, and I might add it runs the risk of overplaying into people's sensitivities.
Well, it's good to see you speaking out against it, Renee. And look, I really hope that that's a position that is taken by all your colleagues across the aisle in Parliament. It's been very sad to see a prominent court case in recent weeks where we've seen people defending the idea of men in women's spaces and in women's sports. But let's hope that this law doesn't come into place and then weaponise those who have that particular view. Renee Heath, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks so much for having me, Lyle.